This is what everyone's talking about.
Everything's on the table.
This is what champions come to take. This is what everyone came to see.
And the slam!
No do-overs. No second chances. No more Mr. Nice Guy. This is winner take all. The NBA Finals continue on ABC and the ESPN app.
Looking to see what's happening around your home? Ring's battery doorbell helps you track packages and see who's at your door in real time. The Outdoor Cam Plus protects your yard at night with a wide field of view and clearer Retinal 2K video. Or upgrade to 4K cameras and doorbells with Retinal Vision for ultra-clear zoom and detail. Your door, your yard, your home. With Ring, it's protected. Shop cameras, doorbells, and more at ring.com now.
Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Truth Seekers Radio podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kenny Williamson, and today what we're going to be talking about is, like you know, I get lots of questions, answers, emails, comments, that kind of stuff. And I was talking about, I think it's the last podcast I did about Israel. Talking about their pride festivals and stuff they've got going on over there, which, you know, is obviously pride, a festival, goes completely against the Bible and God's Word. So I was talking about that, and you can listen to the podcast. And I don't know if I mentioned Paul. I don't really know how Paul came up in this, but one of the questions I got is, well, I had a statement saying that Paul was not really an apostle. He's nobody, something to the effect of that. And they want to discredit Paul. They hate Paul. Lots of people hate Paul. And I've had a podcast about that again. I mean, I've talked about that in other podcasts where I've had people say, why do so many people go against Paul? Well, because Paul taught faith, grace, with no works. And he taught you could be saved by grace through faith with no works, and you can stay saved by grace. Okay? And that's not what a lot of your, I don't know what they are, false teachers, devils, whatever they are, that's not what they want you to do. They want you to be under the law, the Old Testament law that was handed down to the Jews, right, by Moses, the 10 Commandments and all the laws that came along with that. The 10 Commandments was just the tip of the iceberg. They had like 400 or 500 or 600 different laws. And see, they didn't want, they wanted laws. And God gave them the rules, the laws, knowing that they couldn't actually obey them because they're men. So they're sinners, they're men, and so of course they couldn't keep up with the law. And if you can't do any of the law, well, you're, if you can't keep up with one part of it, you're guilty of all of it. And of course, the guilt means that you're worthy of death, right? So they would do their little sacrifices and stuff to try to clean themselves up, and it would last for a very short time, and then it'd have to be done again. So they're constantly having to sacrifice animals, endless deals over and over and over. Never could keep up with it. Failed miserably. So, so God the Father sends his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, which is himself in the flesh, as an ultimate sinless sacrifice, which would cover it all. But you have to believe in it. You have to ask for forgiveness. You have to ask God to save you, whatever. So Paul taught this. Okay, he was approached by Jesus Christ, converted to a Christian. He was a Jew who was persecuting Christians, killing Christians. And Jesus stopped him one day on the road to Damascus and said, hey, why are you, this is, not exact Bible verbiage here. Basically stopped him and said, hey, why are you persecuting me? And so he goes on to tell him, and, he gets converted. And so then God changes his name from Saul to Paul. And of course, Paul teaches all what you've got to do, Romans, Galatians, Ephesians, all that, written by Paul. So I've had people ask me before, they've made the statements that people hate Paul. Well, that's because they want to get you back under those old laws, which you can't do. They couldn't do it. You can't do it. Okay? So in other words, if you rely on works, which is what the law is, you can't do this, you have to do this, you can't do this, you can't walk this many feet, you can't build a fire. I mean, it's all works. Knowing full well that you cannot, you can't do anything with it, so you could never abide by it. What's your alternative? Well, that means you're hellbound. So anybody that tries to get you back under Old Testament law obviously wants you to burn in hell, right? Because you can't keep up with it, you can't do it, you could never do it. Nobody could do it. So here comes Paul and Jesus Christ, and they don't want you to look at that. They want you to stay away from that. Because, see, then you might actually get saved, right? So they don't want it. So they hate Paul because Paul preached it. So what they do a lot is they go through Paul's stuff, and I had somebody do that, and they try to pick apart every single thing that he's ever done or said to try to prove it wrong, instead of reading the verses that tells you can't, Jesus came to fulfill the law, he's all that kind of stuff. Just throw all that out, but let's focus on this. So one of the questions that I had, I've got 3 questions here. Well, I guess it's 1 and 3. And of course there was a whole bunch of this, but this is just a part of it. This guy here is saying that, Paul is not an apostle. He's a fraud, and everything that he says doesn't make any sense. So he's like, can you explain the discrepancies here in these King James verses about Paul? Where did Paul get told what he must do? Number 1, there's not any discrepancies here, okay? It's your lack of understanding. But we'll explain that here. So like I said, Saul was on his way to Damascus, on the road to Damascus, when he ran into the burning bush, if you remember that story, right? And he got converted into Paul. And
patty cake, baker's man.
If your child has moderate to severe eczema that's not well controlled with prescription topicals, their itchy skin can feel uncomfortable when playing with others. Dupixent, dupilumab, helps kids as young as 6 months stay ahead of their eczema.
Patty cake, baker's man. Bake me
so they can have clearer skin and noticeably less itch. Dupixent helps them heal their skin from within, and it's not a cream, steroid, or immunosuppressant. Severe allergic reactions, including skin reactions, can occur. Get help right away for face, mouth, tongue, or throat swelling, wheezing, or trouble breathing. Tell your doctor right away of new or worsening eye problems like eye pain or vision changes, skin symptoms, joint aches and pain, or a parasitic infection. Don't change or stop other treatments without talking to your doctor.
patty cake, baker's
Dupixent helps your child feel the heal. Ask your child's eczema specialist. Visit Dupixent.com or call 1-844-DUPIXENT.
If you're a QuickBooks customer looking to grow without the growing pains, you need the Intuit ERP, the AI native ERP that upgrades right from QuickBooks. Learn more at intuit.com/ERP.
in this instance, somewhere, God basically tells him, here's what I want you to do. Okay, now this story is told 2 different times. Once it's told in Acts 9, verse 6, and the other it's told in Acts 26. Okay, well, why is that? Well, See, this guy here who wrote this, he doesn't understand this. So he goes on here and he says, he obviously doesn't understand anything. I mean, Paul, he says he's lying because in Acts 9, it says that, and I'll read it to you, that he got told what to do in the city. But in Acts 26, he got told right there on the road what to do. It's just so people see Paul can't even get his own story straight. Okay, what this gentleman doesn't understand is that Acts 9 was not written by Paul, it was written by Luke, the doctor. Okay, this is the official story that Luke told from his perspective. Now, when we get on into Acts 26, now it's Paul telling the story, but he's not telling it chronologically like, listen, this is exactly what happened at this moment, and the very next moment this happened. That's not what he's doing. He's recounting what happened to him on the road to Damascus, right? He's just recapping all this stuff, and the reason he's doing it is he's telling it to a king, and the king is called King Agrippa, if I'm saying the name right. And there's a reason that he was doing it. Let me read that to you. So what it was is, okay, Paul appeared before King Agrippa, and the reason for that is they were trying to bring formal charges against Paul. Okay, and they were going to take it to the main guy over there in Rome, the Roman somebody over there. So they had a new governor switch or something, and it was Festus was his name. And so basically this Festus was using King Agrippa to help formulate charges against Paul. Why? Well, because Festus was a Roman and he didn't understand any Jewish religion, and King Agrippa did. So he was kind of like one of the guys that comes to the courtroom, the expert guy. So he's coming in to say, here's what Paul has done right or wrong based on these charges against him. So King Agrippa asked Paul to retell his story, okay, in front of Festus, the governor, to find out if he's committed a crime or not. Because they're going to take it to Caesar. That's what it was. So basically, these Romans, before they could send Paul over to Caesar, they had to have some official charges filed, in other words. So they can't just send him up there willy-nilly. They've got to say, look, he's been accused of this, and they're going to say, well, is he guilty of it? Well, yes or no, based on what King Agrippa says, because he's an expert in Jewish stuff, because he's a Jew, right? Okay. So basically, Festus invites King Agrippa to interview Paul to clarify the situation of what's happened here. So this meeting that we're talking about here is Acts 26. That's what it's detailed in. Okay? So Paul uses this to share his conversion story that he has, and he also uses it to share the gospel. Okay, well, after he tells them this story, both King Agrippa and Festus, the Roman, they both came to the conclusion that Paul was in fact innocent and has done nothing wrong. Okay. But he still has to go to Caesar because they had already appealed to the Roman. And once this thing's been sent in, it's just like another government paperwork. You've already sent the paperwork in, so you got to go. But that's beside the fact. So we back up to the question here. Okay. And let me get my question pulled back up here. It is, can you explain the discrepancies here in these two verses? Okay, well, let's look up the verses real quick, just so we can, now that you know what's happened, let's look. So, Acts 9:6, the conversion of Saul, okay. He's talking to Jesus Christ. He's already getting stopped by the bush. Okay. And Acts 9:6 says, and he, this is Paul, and he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me do? And the Lord said unto him, you see, it's talking in the third person here. The Lord said unto him, Paul, or Saul at this point, right? Arise and go into the city, and it shall be told what you must do. Now, you can clearly see how I'm reading this here. And he, trembling, and the Lord said to him. So does that sound like Paul is writing this? He's not. Luke wrote this, and Luke is telling what he saw. That's why it's referring to him in the third person. If Paul had have written this, it would have said, and I stood there trembling. And then when the Lord said unto me, but he's not saying that because Paul didn't write it. You get it? Okay. So the guy that sent me this, he says, Paul, he doesn't even say the same thing twice. He doesn't even know what happened. He's lying. It's fake. Paul's not telling the story. See, you don't know anything about the Bible. You're ignorant. See, how could you know anything? You're not saved. You have no discernment. So of course you read this and you turn around and then read Acts 22 or Acts, whichever it is. We're going to read it here in a second. You're like, oh, well, see, it says something a little bit different. So he's lying. What? Number one, Paul's not telling the story twice. He's telling it once. There's two different people telling it. It's just like if you go to work in the day and somebody is watching you at work and they're like, yeah, Kenny, he came to work, he did a couple of calls, he went and had lunch, he talked on the phone a few times, and, then he went home. And that's the story. Just kind of a vague, here's what I saw. And then somebody comes up to you later and says, Kenny, what'd you do? Well, I took a phone call in the morning. Well, now, wait a second. I didn't see that. I heard that you didn't do anything until lunchtime. Well, no, I took 3 calls and I did this and I stopped and picked up some of this and did this. Oh, well, that's not what the story I got. It's like, well, you got an overview, which is what Luke did. And now I'm telling you details. Now, I may not tell you in exact order. I say, well, I did go to lunch and I took some calls before that and I ran around a little bit and I did this and I did that. Oh, you're wanting perfectly in chronological order down by the minute? Oh, well, you didn't ask that. You just asked what I did today. So I gave you an overview. Now, somebody that watched what I did today, they gave you their point of view overview, and now I'm telling you my point of view overview. Now, does that mean either one of us are lying? No. You see, that's the kind of stuff we get into when you start messing around with devils. They try to double talk and make everything out to be fake so they can somehow trick you into thinking, well, the Bible's not real. Paul's not real, so you don't have any salvation. You need to go back under the law. You see? So let's continue. So we switch over here to Acts 26, 16 through 18, which is the other one in discrepancy here. And this is Jesus Christ talking to Paul. And he says, no, I take that back. Paul is telling King Agrippa of his conversion. And if you look this up, it's in red because he's telling you what Jesus said. Okay? Let me clarify that. So Jesus said, but arise and stand upon thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and a witness of both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things in which I will appear unto thee. So this is Jesus Christ telling this directly to him. So delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles unto whom I will send thee, to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. Okay, well, so the original question is, can you explain the discrepancy? Where did Paul get told what he must do? Okay, he's saying what he must do. That's what Jesus Christ told him. Here's what Jesus said I must do. And he's telling it to King Agrippa for Festus, for a court date. Okay? It's not in a chronological order. He's saying what happened to him in his conversion. So why are we comparing that to Acts 9:6, okay, where Luke is telling just an overview of what happened? You see, it's not a discrepancy. It's two people telling two different stories to two different people, Has nothing to do with the other, okay? So that's the first one. The second problem he has in Acts is, did the other men fall to the ground? Because see, he says Paul is lying here. Because in Acts 9, Acts 9:7, let's read it to you. Acts 9:7, it says, and the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. See, they stood speechless. This is what Luke said. He says, yeah, those guys, they stood there speechless. They heard a voice, but they didn't see anybody. Okay. Acts 26:14, what's it say? Acts 26:14 says, and when they were all fallen to the earth, I heard a voice speaking unto me and saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why thou persecutest thou me? Is it hard for thee to kick against the pricks? So here he's saying, see, and when they were all fallen to the earth. But in 9:7 it says, they stood speechless. Okay. Good gravy. Okay. So he's saying, did the other men fall to the ground in Acts 9:7? No, they didn't fall to the ground. But in Acts 26, yes, they fell to the ground. Okay. Explanation for this? Well, again, Acts 9 says they stood speechless, right? Okay. Let me find my place on my verses here. Yeah. So in Acts 9, the men stood speechless. Acts 26 basically says they were all fallen to the earth. This can be, number one, it's two different people telling the story, but it can also be timing and emphasis. I mean, they all fell down the moment the bright light appeared. You see, the moment the light appeared, they all fell down. But then they all got back up, except for Paul. You see? So by the time Paul was speaking with the Lord, all the other men had already gotten back up, and they were standing while Paul remained on the ground. So when he tells his story in Acts 26, he like I said, it's an overview, He said, and we were all fallen to the earth, and I heard a voice speaking to me, saying, Paul, or Saul, Saul, why thou persecute me? Where in verse 9, Acts 9, it says, and the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice. The thing is, that's not Saul telling the story, or Paul telling the story. That's Luke. So Luke says, yeah, they heard a voice. They were all standing around speechless. They didn't know what to do. And he says, well, they all fell down, but then, but he doesn't say, well, they got right back up. He's just saying, well, everybody fell down and I heard the voice. But when Luke looked over there, they were standing up. So they did fall down, but then they got back up. So who's lying? Nobody. It's the same story told from a different perspective, possibly a different time. If you're at work, again, you're at work and you're sitting in your chair doing your work, like this. And a guy walks by and he looks in your office and he sees you sitting in your chair. Well, then you get up and you're talking on the phone and you're standing there. And somebody walks by and they look in your office and you're standing there. Now, the one guy says, well, I saw Kenny, he was sitting in his chair. The other guy says, well, I saw Kenny, he was standing by his chair. Are they lying? No. They saw you at two different times, and they're two different people telling the story. And then they say, well, Kenny, what's your version? It's like, well, I was sitting down, but I was also standing up. Different times. You didn't ask me. So basically, if I was telling you the story and I wanted to highlight something, I may say, well, I was standing over by the bookcase and I saw this. It's like, oh, I thought you were sitting down. Well, I was. Well, I thought you were standing by the chair. Well, I was. But when I'm telling you the story, in my mind, I was over here by the bookcase, and that's the story I'm telling you. It's not a discrepancy. Two different people, two different perspectives, two different points of view, and two different times. Acts 9 is Luke's official story. That's the record. This is Paul stating his case to King Agrippa. And he's just overviewing of what's happened, not in exact order. Why would you think it's an exact order? Okay, so that's the next one. Okay, what's the other one here? Okay. Oh, the other discrepancy here. By the way, he says, check out Paul's Damascus Road conversion. He couldn't even get that story straight. Because he's comparing he's comparing Acts 9 to Acts 26. Okay, two different people, two different things. And then on this one, he says, did the other man hear the voice? Yes, in Acts 9. No, in Acts 22. So see, Paul can't get his story right. Well, Acts 22, again, is Paul telling the story to somebody else, not even King Agrippa. Okay, so let's get to that real quick. Let me get back to Acts 9:7. And I've already read it once, but it says, and the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. So, they heard a voice, according to this, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. So did they hear a voice or did they not hear a voice? Well, let's go to the next one. All right. So Acts 22:9, Paul talking here, and he says, and they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. And then, of course, you've got it in 9:7. Well, if it's saying whatever work for me, 9:7. And they heard a voice, but seeing no man. So it's like, well, which did they do? Did they hear a voice or did they not hear a voice? Okay. Well, so we've jumped over from Acts 9 again, which is Luke. Luke is telling the story from his perspective. Now we're jumping over to Acts 22 and saying that Paul got it wrong again. Well, Paul is telling this story in Acts 22 to another group of people. Okay. So number one, but he's telling it to another group of people. And he says, they didn't hear it. But there's a difference between hearing a sound and understanding something. Okay, the Bible uses that kind of terminology all the time. And that distinction appears in other places in Scripture. For example, it says, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. Well, we know they all have ears. So when you say, he that has ears, let him hear. Okay, that's one example of this. So obviously that means everyone that has ears and can hear sounds, it's meaning let him understand. So you can hear it, but do you understand it? So those that have ears, let him hear. In other words, let him understand. Okay. So, for example, here's another one. So in Acts 9:7 means the men heard the sound of a voice. They heard something. That's what Luke said. In Acts 22:9, when Paul was retelling this story, it said means they didn't understand the message that was being spoken to Paul. So he's like, so they didn't hear it. They didn't hear the message. They heard something, but they didn't hear what I heard. You see? So that's not a lie. He's telling his version of it. Oh, they heard something. They heard a voice possibly, but they didn't hear what I heard. The message was specifically to him. Okay? And for example, we've got John 12:28 here, and they're talking about this different things, and it says, then came there a voice from heaven. So we heard a voice from heaven. It says, the people therefore that stood by and heard it said that it thundered. So, in other words, some heard the words and understood it, and some just heard a sound that sounded like thunder. So they heard thunder, and the other ones heard speaking. You see? So they all didn't hear the same thing. That's what happened here. So again, Paul is not lying. Now, who was he talking to? Let's look it up here. So in Acts, like I told you, in the other one there, Acts 26, he's speaking to King Agrippa, who is basically listening to it for Festus, the governor, so it can be taken to Caesar. They're looking to draw charges up, trying to figure out what he's done wrong. So they say, so they're wanting to know. So he tells them the story of how he got converted. Generically, they find him innocent. They say, well, he's not guilty of anything. Now, in this particular one here, in Acts 22, this is, and I'll just lay it out here for you. Basically, a riot broke out in the temple when there were Jews there, and they accused Paul of bringing Gentiles into the temple and defiling it. They didn't want any Gentiles in there, so they were mad at him and accused them of him defiling the temple. Okay. So there was a Roman commander there, and so this Roman commander and these different soldiers, they basically rescued Paul from this mob that were trying to attack and kill him, probably. So Paul, at this point, asks permission to address this crowd of people, and this Roman commander allows it. So Paul stands on the steps of this temple and talks to them, and he addresses them as fellow Jews because he himself is a Jew. And they're Jews. Now, he's been converted, but they haven't, so he addresses them as Jews, okay? So when they heard him speaking in Hebrew, they listened because they're like, oh, this guy's speaking our language, right? So in this thing, through this mob that wanted to kill him, Paul shares his testimony, his Jewish background, how he used to persecute Christians and how he enjoyed it. And he also shares this encounter, his dramatic, if you will, this fantastic encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, which led to his conversion and his calling to preach to the Gentiles. So, in summary, he was trying to defend his actions and preach or evangelize to these different Jewish people, okay? How God changed him, the whole little story. So anyway, as it turns out, this crowd erupts again when it's mentioned that his mission is to the Gentiles. They don't want to hear it. They hate the Gentiles. Okay, my camera's out of focus. So they hate the Gentiles. So they erupt again. Okay. Yeah. That's it. So he's trying to tell this story to a mob who wants to kill him. He's trying to summarize it and kind of tell the story of what happened to him. You see? Again, he's telling kind of an overview of what's happened. Not in any specific chronological order. Not exactly. He's not going into details. He's like, well, they didn't hear they heard something, but they didn't hear this. He's just kind of overviewing it all. And this guy here, he's like, oh, well, Paul doesn't even know the difference, what happened to him. He tells the story 3 different ways. No, he doesn't. This story is to one group of people. The other story is for his defense, for Caesar. The other story in Acts 9 is not even Paul telling the story, it's Luke. So I wanted to, because, I got this asked to me, so I thought, well, I'll ask the questions. I'll answer the questions. And he's got a whole bunch more on there. But basically, it's the same exact thing. He picks something out of Acts 9 and says it doesn't 100% line up with something in Acts 26. He doesn't have the concept of what's happening. So there's a whole bunch of other questions, but it's all the same context. Luke tells the story of what he saw and how he told it. Doesn't mean it's 100% accurate. I mean, it's accurate, but you can leave stuff out and it's still accurate. You don't have to tell every detail. Then Paul comes along and tells it for his defense and just happens to go ahead and tell it just to show people that he's been converted. And then he tells it again to a mob that wants to kill him. and they're mad because he's talking to the Gentiles, and they hate Gentiles. They still do. Okay. Those particular Jews over there, of course, they're a synagogue of Satan now, probably were then too. They call Gentiles goyim now. So look that up. So they hate Gentiles. They hated them then, and they hate them now. They don't want them to get any of God's stuff. But unfortunately for them, God grafted us right on in. And in Jesus Christ, there is no Jew or Gentile. And they hate that, see, because they want to be it. They want to be God's people. They're the Jews, but they rejected Jesus Christ, so they're done. I mean, unless they come back, you know what I mean? So, but this is an example of, and this guy here, he put a lot of other stuff in there, but it had to do with, Paul being fake, and he's a fake this and that. So in other words, get back underneath the Jews. The Jews are all correct. Their Talmud and all that, that's all accurate, and I follow a guy who's a preacher, a born-again barbarian. He reads, he bought the Talmud, all of it, so he can go through it. And he pinpoints out in these books the filth and the stuff they do, and how, they can have little kids as wives. The list goes on and on and on. But from what I've read and seen, they consider the goyim, which is us, Gentiles. Of course, we're not Gentiles anymore, but that's what we were then. We're Christians now, but they don't see that. They see us as, like cattle, something that they can use for their ends, for their own means, right? And so that's what we have today in Synagogue of Satan. But we also still have people like this that are dead set on getting back to that Jewish junk. They want you under the law, they want you under works, something you can't do. If you fall for that and did never get saved, you're just going to burn in hell. Just like all of them are. If you deny Jesus Christ and don't accept his free gift, your alternative is hell. That's what the Bible teaches. Okay? And people, that's in the New Testament. Okay? But the Old Testament prophesied everything happened in the New Testament. It's all there. Okay? It's all like this. But, and I'm not saying I'm any smarter than this guy here, but, but I am, right? I mean, he doesn't understand the Bible. He has no discernment. He can't properly divide the word of truth. He's clearly never studied it to show himself approved, rightly dividing the word of truth, because he doesn't even know that, the doctor wrote part of it, and Paul wrote the other. Luke, and he don't get it. But if you're trying to go through the Bible and nitpick stuff like that out, well, what does that tell you? Okay. What you need to be doing is praying to God and asking for discernment so you can understand this. And then read it. Okay, and if you really want to know, ask some questions, and me or other people that are going to try to help you understand it. If I can even understand it, if I can't understand it, I'll ask somebody that does. But, ask. Don't immediately say it's not true because of this. What you're doing by doing that, immediately denying it and trying to find fault in it, that's called philosophy. That's what philosophers do. They're constantly searching, looking, trying to argue with it. That's why the Bible tells you to stay away from philosophy. It's not any good. You're questioning everything. Well, you can question things, of course, but when you start questioning God, dude, come on. Get real. Okay? And this, I understand. It's, some people, this is a hang-up. Okay? But people are looking. They're just searching for any little thing so they don't have to believe it. That way they can be their own God. right? They don't want the God of this book right here. They don't want that God. Do you think they want the God of this book telling them what they can and can't do? Oh, no. That's why over there in Israel, they're having Pride Land, okay? Because this Bible says pride is an abomination. So they do it. This book here, says that you're not supposed to be a sodomite. It's not natural. God doesn't like it. So that's what they do. Everything this book says, the devil does opposite. And I mean everything. If this book, which it does on page 1 in Genesis, if it tells you that there's a firmament, they say, no, there's not. If this book tells you that the earth is stationary, no, it's not, it's moving. This book tells you that God knows you. He knew people in the womb. He says, I know you. I knew you then. Knew everything. But that's what this book teaches. What's the world teach? Oh, well, you're nothing in the womb. You're just a clump of cells. You're nobody. You're nothing. You're zero. This book says God knows you in the womb. Okay? But the world says, oh, no, in fact, let's just rip that baby out of there. Okay? Let's just abort them. They're nothing anyway. Well, no. If God knows you before you're in the womb and while you're in the womb, that means you're somebody. Right? So the world's 100% opposite of what this teaches. The world teaches 100% opposite of what the Apostle Paul taught. That's why the world hates the Apostle Paul. That's why the world hates Jesus Christ. That's why the world hates this book. Okay? And if you're a Christian, that's why you need to live by this book. This book tells you not to be a part of the world. Oh, you have to live in the world, but you're not to be a part of it. Right? So that goes deep. There's a whole lot entailed in that. So what do these guys like this want? They want you back under the law. They don't want you believing that book. Do it, do whatever you want. Go back to the Talmud where you can marry little kids and that kind of stuff. Oh, and if anybody goes against your religion, call them a goyim and, purposely do things to harm them. That's not what the Bible teaches, is it? No. So if you're going to sit here and try to nitpick that book, well, number one, you're not a Christian. Just forget it. Now, if you are a Christian and you want to learn more and you don't understand it, that's fine. Pray for discernment. I'm going to tell you right now, this book is designed by God for you to understand if he allows you to understand it. An unsaved person is never going to understand this. This is gibberish to him. It's gibberish. You cannot understand the things of God if you're not saved. It's not happening. Why would you? You see? That's why you don't understand that, like this story here is told from two different perspectives, from two different people, at two different times, possibly months, years apart. Who knows when? That's okay though. So you don't need to know that. You just want to find one discrepancy and try to claim the whole thing's fake. I had one guy, he did that. I was on a live with him on TikTok, and he said his whole entire reason for not believing the Bible, he said, I don't believe the Bible's fake. I said, really? Why is that? Well, because of one thing in there. The whole thing's fake. I said, really? What's that? He said, it says rabbits chew their cud. And I did a podcast on this. Rabbits don't chew their cud, so the Bible's a liar. Okay. If that's all you've got, based on your very limited intellect, based on what the world told you, well, hey, you're going to hell, buddy. Like a bullet. Okay, so just whenever the end is here for you, don't even bother holding your breath. Boom, you're going to be in hell. Over a rabbit and its cud. Hey, if that's what you want. But let me explain something to you real quick before you make that decision. Our world is opposite of the Bible, number one. Our scientists, majority of them, are all atheists, devils, and liars. They go against this book. The devil's running the world and all of them. 100% against the book. Now, Just because a man, whoever he was, or a scientist, whoever he was, or some college, and by the way, these are all atheists and devil worshipers, majority of them, they may not be openly worshiping the devil, but they're serving the devil, whether they know it or not. They come in and they reclassify animals 300 years ago. And then, so you have somebody that knows nothing or is an atheist, comes in and reclassifies an animal that the Bible says is one thing, and now they say it's something else, but you go by what the man says now, and then call the Bible a liar. That's what you're doing. For example, rabbits chewing their cud. Well, because today, for an animal to be considered chewing its cud, it has to have so many stomachs, and it has to regurgitate it up into its mouth again, and then it chews it up again, and that's chewing the cud. That's the specification today. Because a rabbit technically doesn't do that, the Bible's a liar. No. A rabbit re-chews its food again, it just don't spit it up to do it. But it also keeps re-chewing certain parts of its food and does it again and again until it gets all the nutrients. Biblical days, they called that chewing its cud. Just because they don't do it today doesn't mean doesn't mean anything, right? Same as the Bible says all the animals in the ocean are fish. The sea is full of fish, right? Everybody knows what a fish is, right? But see, we come along 5,000 years later, 4,000 years later, and we have some bright scientist that's too stupid to wash his hands. But he says, hey, you know that dolphin that we purposely killed? Well, that thing has a blowhole on its head. That thing's breathing air. And so is that whale over there. That whale actually comes up and breathes air. But a shark doesn't, and a bass doesn't, and a crappie doesn't, and a squid doesn't. So let's see. Let's reclassify everything. And if it has a blowhole on its head and comes up and gets some air, that's not a fish. That's a mammal. Because it breathes air. So we're going to reclassify everything. So now if somebody says, well, the ocean's full of fish. Well, that's nothing but a lie. The ocean's full of mammals too. Well, just because you call it a mammal now doesn't mean God called it a mammal. You see, when God made it, he said if it's in the ocean, it's a fish. Now, just because you call it something different 4,000 years later doesn't mean he was a liar, does it? It just means you reclassified it as something different. Just like they're classifying people now by the color of their skin. They classify everything now, right? Before, it was just people. It was mankind. But now it's, oh, well, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that. Everything has to be segregated out and, separated for different nefarious means, by the way. So that's what we have today. So just because you have something filthy and stupid today, and it goes against what the Bible said, doesn't mean that the Bible's wrong. Okay? Get that through your head. Now, the world we're living in today is what's backwards. Okay? The book here is correct, and if anything goes against the book, then it's incorrect. As simple as that. Now, if you don't want to believe that, go out and believe Elon Musk. Go out and believe Clinton News Network, okay? Go out and believe these devils running around here with all the crime and all the people coming up missing and all the people that, are ending themselves. You just go ahead and believe anything they say, right? Go ahead. Believe everything they tell you. You can look around and see that it was created. You can look around and tell that it's fantastic. And according to the Bible, just by looking around and seeing creation itself, you will not have an excuse for creation. You'll be like, well, I've been looking. Well, you saw the creation. You see the trees. You see the animals. It didn't come up from Big Bang. It didn't miraculously happen. You can clearly see that. You can clearly see there was a creation. So now you should understand there's a God, and you're going to be held accountable for it. You ain't getting away with it. This dumb act is not going to work. Right? Oh, I didn't know. I didn't know there was a God. I thought I was a monkey. That ain't going to work. Okay? You're still going to go to hell. So, anyway, having said that, thanks for listening. Tune in again anytime. We're gonna keep cranking these things out. It's flatbro.com, truthseekersministry.org, kennywilliamson.com. Check us out on Spotify. We got a lot of podcasts on there, on YouTube. I've got one on TikTok called Flat Earth Man. You can find me on there. Same deal. Yeah, check it out. And let me know. Have any questions, comments, concerns? Just send them my way and we'll address them one at a time. So get saved before it's too late. End is near, guys, or could be. And of course, you don't know when your end's going to be. You're just one heartbeat away, right? One heartbeat away. So thanks for listening. And until we meet again, God bless you.